There are 6 words that ancient Stoic philosophers believed could change the way every single person on earth sees you. Not a trick, not a manipulation tactic, not something you read in a pickup artist's playbook. 6 words rooted in 2,000-year-old philosophy that instantly shift the energy you carry into a room. Say them to yourself before a first date, before a job interview, before a difficult conversation with someone you love, and something in you settles. Something in you becomes magnetic. The 6 words are these: I choose you. I need nothing. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why those 6 words work, how to actually live them, not just recite them, and why almost everyone you've ever met who felt hard to get, impossible to shake, or quietly powerful, was living this principle without even knowing its name. This is the Stoic secret to becoming irresistible, and it has nothing to do with looks, money, or charm. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for anyone who is done being ruled by their emotions and ready to build a life of quiet strength, discipline, and inner peace. If you're new here, we take the ancient teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca and translate them into tools you can actually use today in your relationships, your career, and your own mind. If that sounds like the kind of person you're becoming, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Almost every person who has ever felt unwanted, unseen, or unchosen was, in that exact moment, needing something from someone else. Not wanting, needing. There's a chasm between those 2 words, and most people spend their entire lives never learning the difference. They think they're the same thing dressed in different clothes. They are not. Wanting is preference. Needing is dependency. And dependency, no matter how well you disguise it, radiates outward like heat off a summer road. People feel it before they can name it. Think about the last time you were around someone who seemed a little too eager. Maybe it was a co-worker who complimented the boss one too many times. Maybe it was a friend who texted back within 4 seconds, every single time, no matter the hour. Maybe it was someone on a date who agreed with everything you said, laughed too hard at jokes that weren't funny, and seemed to be constantly checking whether you were pleased with them. What did you feel toward that person? If you're honest with yourself, it probably wasn't attraction. It was something closer to mild discomfort, maybe even a small quiet urge to create distance. Now think about the opposite. Someone who listened more than they spoke. Someone who didn't scramble to fill every silence. Someone who could disagree with you calmly without flinching, without needing your approval to feel okay about themselves. That person didn't try to impress you, and yet you found yourself wanting to impress them. This is not a coincidence, and it's not some cruel trick of human psychology designed to punish good-hearted people. It is a law as old as human nature itself, and the Stoics understood it centuries before modern psychology, gave it fancy names like approval-seeking or anxious attachment. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who became one of history's greatest philosophers, taught something radical for his time and radical for ours. He said that suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from what we believe we need in order to be okay. The moment you convince yourself that you need another person's love, attention, or approval to feel whole, you have handed that person the keys to your peace of mind. And people, consciously or not, can sense when they're holding someone else's keys. It doesn't feel like an honor. It feels like a burden. This is the trap. Neediness isn't unattractive because of some arbitrary social rule. It's unattractive because it signals an incomplete person searching for the missing piece in someone else. And nobody, deep down, wants to be someone else's missing piece. They want to be chosen by someone who is already whole. That's the entire secret buried inside those 6 words. Let's start unpacking them, one Stoic principle at a time. Before we go further, I want you to comment one word below. Are you a wanter or a needer in your relationships? Be honest. You might be surprised what you type. At the core of Stoic philosophy sits a single idea so simple that people mistake it for obvious, and so difficult to live that most people never actually apply it. It's called the dichotomy of control. Epictetus opened his famous handbook, the Enchiridion, with a division of the entire universe into two categories: things within our control and things outside our control. Our judgments, our desires, our reactions, our efforts, those are ours. Everyone else's judgments, reactions, feelings, and choices, those are not ours, no matter how much we wish they were. Here is where it gets personal. Whether another person is attracted to you, whether they text back, whether they choose to stay, whether they see your worth, none of that is within your control. You can be kind, funny, attentive, generous and consistent, and still, the final decision of another human heart belongs to that human heart alone. Most people spend their whole lives fighting this truth. They try to control the uncontrollable through excessive effort, through people-pleasing, through anxious texts, through performing a version of themselves they think will be more acceptable. And every single one of those efforts is a rope thrown at smoke. You cannot grip what isn't yours to grip. The Stoics didn't see this as bad news. They saw it as liberation. If someone else's affection is not within my control, then my peace cannot depend on it. If my peace cannot depend on it, then I am free to want that affection, genuinely, fully, without desperation, because I no longer need it to be okay. This is the exact mechanism behind the 6 words. I choose you, that's desire. Operating in the realm of what's within your control, your own choice, your own action, your own presence. I need nothing. That's the release of what was never yours to grip in the first place. Their reaction, their choice, their heart. When you separate these two things, you're choosing from their choosing. Something remarkable happens internally. The anxiety drains out of the interaction. You stop performing. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop checking your phone every 90 seconds. And paradoxically, that calm, grounded energy is the single most attractive quality a human being can carry into a room. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled the most powerful empire on earth, wrote privately in his journal, never intending for the world to read it, that the tranquility he sought could only be found within his own judgments, never in the opinions or affections of others. Here was a man with unlimited external power, and even he understood that trying to control how others felt about him was a fool's game. If the most powerful man in the ancient world couldn't force affection through control, what makes any of us think we can? Let this sink in for a moment. The very thing you've been chasing, being wanted, becomes achievable only once you stop chasing it. Not because chasing is morally wrong, but because chasing itself signals the very lack you're trying to hide. Let's slow down and take these 6 words apart, phrase by phrase, because each half carries its own weight. I choose you. This is not passive. This is not neutral. This is an active, deliberate act of will. Notice the word choose, not need, not want. Desperately, not can't live without. Choosing implies options. It implies that you are a person with a full life, a sense of self, and other possibilities available to you. And out of all of that, you are selecting this person, this moment, this connection. There is a profound difference between someone who says, I choose you from a place of abundance, and someone who says, please choose me from a place of scarcity. The first is magnetic. The second, however well-intentioned, subtly repels. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius that a gift given out of true generosity, expecting nothing in return, is worth infinitely more than a gift given as a transaction, hoping for reciprocity. Attention and affection work the same way. When you give your presence to someone as a genuine choice, expecting nothing forced in return, it lands entirely differently than when you give it as a bid, a hopeful transaction, a please love me back. I choose you says, I see you. I value this, and I am here by decision, not by desperation. I need nothing. This is the harder half to actually live, because it requires something most people avoid their whole lives, facing themselves in solitude and discovering they can survive there. I need nothing does not mean you are cold, detached or emotionally unavailable. It does not mean you don't care. It means the foundation of your worth and your peace does not rest on this person's response. If they walk away, you will grieve, because Stoicism never asked anyone to suppress genuine feeling. But you will not shatter. You will not lose your sense of self. You will not spiral into believing you are unworthy because one person, in one moment, chose differently than you hoped. This is what the Stoics called apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, but actually meaning freedom from being enslaved by destructive passions. It is not the absence of feeling, it is the absence of being controlled by feeling. When you can genuinely say, "I need nothing," and mean it, not as a defense mechanism, not as a wall, but as settled inner truth, you stop bringing desperation into your relationships. And desperation, more than any single force in human interaction, is the fastest way to extinguish attraction. Put the two halves together, and you get a complete Stoic posture toward every relationship in your life. Full presence, zero dependency. Deep desire, zero desperation. Genuine care, zero collapse if it isn't returned. That is what makes a person magnetic, not confidence in the shallow, performative sense we see paraded on social media, but the deep, quiet confidence of someone who has already made peace with themselves, with or without anyone else's validation. If those 6 words just hit you somewhere deep, drop a like on this video right now. It helps more people find this message. And trust me, someone in your life needs to hear this today. Consider sending it to them. I want to tell you about the man who embodied the Stoic principle of "I need nothing" more completely than almost anyone in history. Not as an inspiring slogan repeated from comfort, but as a truth forged through unimaginable hardship. His name was Epictetus, and his life proves that real freedom begins long before circumstances change. Epictetus was born into slavery during the 1st century. He owned nothing, not his possessions, not his time, not even complete authority over his own body. Yet from a life defined by external powerlessness, he developed one of the most liberating philosophies ever recorded. While others searched for freedom in wealth or status, he discovered that true freedom begins in the mind. His greatest teaching was simple but revolutionary. People may control your body, your reputation, or your possessions, but they cannot control your judgments, your character, or your will unless you surrender them yourself. That idea was extraordinary because it came from someone who had every external reason to feel defeated. Instead of allowing his circumstances to define him, he chose to master the only kingdom no one could steal, his own mind. After earning his freedom, Epictetus became one of the most respected teachers in Rome. Powerful politicians, military leaders, and wealthy citizens traveled to hear his wisdom. Notice the irony. The man who once owned nothing eventually possessed something the most influential people desperately wanted. They sought his guidance because his self-worth was never dependent on their approval. His confidence could not be bought, and that made him truly powerful. Hidden inside his life is one of the deepest lessons about attraction. Whether in relationships, friendships, or professional life, genuine attraction is never created by chasing validation. It naturally appears when your identity no longer depends on receiving it. The less desperately you seek approval, the more authentic your presence becomes. Epictetus encouraged his students to ask one question whenever life became painful. Is this within my control? If someone insults you, their words are outside your control, but your response belongs entirely to you. If someone rejects you, their decision is beyond your influence. But your opinion of yourself remains yours alone. Apply this same principle to attraction, and your perspective changes forever. Instead of asking, "How do I make them like me?" a question that depends entirely on another person's mind, you begin asking, "How do I become someone worthy of respect?" while allowing others the freedom to choose. That question belongs completely to you because it depends only on your character, discipline, and daily actions. That single shift transforms everything. It is the difference between anxious chasing and quiet confidence, between seeking validation and creating value. That is the essence of Stoic, Magnetism, the power of becoming so grounded within yourself that your peace no longer depends on anyone else's approval. Now let's talk about a very different kind of man, one born not into slavery, but into the highest power the ancient world could offer. Marcus Aurelius became emperor of Rome at a time of plague, war, betrayal, and constant political maneuvering. Everyone around him wanted something from him. Everyone had an angle. In that kind of environment, it would be easy, even natural, to become suspicious of everyone, or worse, to become someone constantly performing for approval, terrified of losing the loyalty of allies and the love of the people. Instead, in his private journal, the collection we now call Meditations, never written for publication, never written for an audience, Marcus repeatedly reminded himself of one core truth. His sense of worth could not be built on the good opinion of others, because the good opinion of others is fickle, unreliable, and entirely outside his control. He wrote to himself that it is not fitting to waste the remainder of one's life caring about what others think, when that time could be spent on one's own directing mind. He reminded himself again and again, in the quiet of night, alone with his thoughts, that praise is a fleeting sound, and blame is a fleeting sound, and neither should knock a person off the foundation of their own judgment. Here's what's remarkable, and what history confirms. Marcus Aurelius, precisely because he did not perform for the approval of the Senate, the army, or the public, became one of the most respected and beloved emperors in Roman history. His self-possession wasn't a barrier to connection. It was the very thing that made his presence commanding, trusted, and, in the truest sense of the word, attractive to those around him. This is the pattern you will find repeated throughout history, and in your own life if you look closely enough. People are not drawn to those who beg for their approval. They are drawn to those who have already approved of themselves and simply extend an invitation for others to join them there. Ask yourself honestly, in your own life, who do you respect more? The friend who constantly seeks your validation for every decision they make, or the friend who makes their own decisions with quiet conviction and simply shares the outcome with you because they value your presence, not your permission? We are drawn to self-sufficiency like moths to a steady flame, not a flickering, desperate one, but a calm, unwavering one that doesn't need our breath to keep burning. Quick question for the comments. Who in your life carries this kind of calm, self-possessed energy? Tag them mentally, or better yet, tell us about them below. I read every comment. Now let us turn to the third great Stoic voice, Seneca, the philosopher, playwright, and statesman, who understood the hidden psychology of desire more deeply than almost anyone in the ancient world. Long before modern psychology explored attachment, emotional dependence, and unhealthy obsession, Seneca had already identified the invisible force that causes so many people to suffer. His insight remains just as relevant today as it was nearly 2,000 years ago. Seneca made an important distinction between two kinds of desire. The first consists of natural desires, things genuinely necessary for a meaningful life, such as good health, loyal friendships, meaningful work, and reasonable comfort. The second consists of desires created by false opinion. These are cravings that our anxious minds exaggerate until they appear far more important than they truly are. Seneca warned that the greatest suffering does not belong to the person who possesses too little. It belongs to the person who constantly believes they need more than they actually do. Now apply this idea to love and attraction. The moment you begin craving another person's attention as though your happiness depends entirely on it, you unknowingly place an impossible burden upon them. You transform an ordinary human being into the source of your emotional survival. No one can carry that responsibility forever. When people sense that someone needs them to provide constant validation, reassurance, or purpose, they often begin pulling away. Not because they are heartless, but because every human being needs emotional freedom to breathe. Seneca never argued that we should stop loving others or avoid meaningful relationships. Stoicism is not a philosophy of emotional isolation. Instead, he encouraged us to examine every powerful desire with honesty. Ask yourself a simple question. Is this desire proportional to reality, or has my imagination inflated it into something it was never meant to become? That single question has the power to expose countless unnecessary fears and attachments. Think back to a time when you desperately wanted something, a relationship, a promotion, or someone's approval. Notice how desperation influenced your behavior. You sent one more message than necessary. You over-explained your intentions. You checked your phone repeatedly, hoping for a reply. Every action silently communicated anxiety instead of confidence. Now compare that with another moment, when you wanted something just as much but trusted yourself enough to let your effort speak for itself. Which version of you felt stronger? Which version naturally attracted better results? Seneca would say the difference was never luck. It was the quality of your inner state. Desire rooted in fear and emotional dependence pushes people away because it quietly asks them to fill a void they never created. But desire grounded in calm confidence becomes naturally attractive because it says, I value your presence, but my peace does not depend upon it. That is why the Stoic phrase, I need nothing, is not cold or emotionless. It is deeply liberating. It does not mean you reject love or human connection. It means you refuse to make another person responsible for your completeness. Instead, you become someone already whole, inviting others to share your journey rather than asking them to become the reason it exists. Understanding a principle intellectually and living it are two entirely different achievements. The Stoics were famous for insisting that philosophy without daily practice is just entertainment. So let's talk about how to actually embody these 6 words in real life. First, build a self that exists independent of any single relationship. This means cultivating your own interests, friendships, disciplines, and sense of purpose that have nothing to do with whether one particular person chooses you. When your entire emotional world orbits a single person, you have handed them a kind of power no human being should carry. Marcus Aurelius kept his private journal, his study of philosophy, his sense of duty to Rome, all of it independent of any single relationship's approval. That inner world was his anchor. Ask yourself, if this relationship ended tomorrow, would you still recognize yourself? Would you still have a life, a rhythm, a sense of purpose? If the honest answer is no, that is not evidence you love deeply. It is evidence you have quietly outsourced your identity. And that is the single most repairable and most important project available to you. Second, practice the pause before the reaction. Epictetus taught his students to insert a small gap between stimulus and response. Someone doesn't text back for a few hours. The untrained mind spirals immediately into anxious stories. They don't like me anymore. I said something wrong. I need to fix this right now. The trained Stoic mind pauses and asks, is this fact or is this fear? Usually it's fear dressed up as fact. That pause is where your power lives. In that small gap, you get to choose your interpretation rather than being dragged by your first anxious impulse. Practicing this daily, in small moments, not just romantic ones, builds the muscle you'll need in the moments that matter most. Third, separate your effort from the outcome deliberately, out loud if you have to. Before a date, before a difficult conversation, before sending a message that matters to you, say to yourself, quietly, or even out loud, a version of the 6 words, I choose to show up fully here. What happens after that is not mine to control. This isn't a magic incantation. It's a mental reset that moves your nervous system from a state of grasping to a state of grounded presence. And presence, more than any clever line or perfect outfit, is what people feel when they're near you. Fourth, examine your cravings the way Seneca examined his. When you notice yourself checking your phone repeatedly, replaying a conversation on loop, or feeling a spike of anxious energy around someone's response to you, pause and ask, is this desire proportional, or has my mind inflated this person into something they were never meant to carry alone? This isn't about shrinking your feelings. It's about right-sizing them so they don't collapse under their own weight. And so you don't collapse under the weight of needing an outcome you cannot control. Fifth, practice solitude deliberately as training. The Stoics considered time alone with one's own thoughts to be essential training, not punishment. Seneca wrote extensively about the difference between being alone and being lonely. The first is a chosen retreat into your own mind. The second is an anxious avoidance of it. If solitude feels unbearable to you, that discomfort is worth investigating directly, because it often reveals exactly where your sense of self has become too dependent on external company to survive quiet moments alone. The person who can sit in a quiet room, alone at peace with their own thoughts, is the same person who can sit across from someone they deeply desire without collapsing into anxious performance. These are not two separate skills. They are the same skill practiced in two different rooms. If you've made it this far, you're clearly serious about actually building this in your life, not just watching another video about it. So subscribe now if you haven't. This channel exists entirely for people exactly like you, and we release new videos on exactly this kind of practical Stoic wisdom regularly. Let me leave you with a story, one that illustrates everything we've discussed far better than any abstract principle could on its own. Picture a man, and we'll call him Marcus, in honor of the emperor whose wisdom shaped this video, who spent years of his life anxiously pursuing the approval of others. In his career, he said yes to every request, stayed late for every task, agreed with every opinion of his superiors, hoping that enough accumulated effort would eventually earn him the respect and advancement he desperately wanted. It never quite worked. He was liked in a mild, forgettable way, but he was never truly respected. People sensed, even if they couldn't articulate it, that he needed their approval more than he trusted his own judgment. In his relationships, the same pattern repeated. He would meet someone he was drawn to, and almost immediately, a quiet panic would set in, a fear of losing them before he'd even truly had them. That fear drove him to overextend, constant texts, excessive compliments, cancelling his own plans to accommodate theirs, agreeing to things he didn't actually want, all in an unconscious bid to make himself indispensable. And time after time, the people he pursued this way eventually drifted. Not because he was unkind or unworthy, but because his desperation, however well-intentioned, was exhausting to be near. It asked something of them they hadn't agreed to give, the responsibility for his entire sense of worth. Then, in a season of solitude, after a particularly painful ending, Marcus encountered Stoic philosophy for the first time. He read Epictetus's insistence that other people's judgments were never his to control. He read Marcus Aurelius's private reminders to himself that praise and blame were both fleeting and unreliable measures of a life well lived. He read Seneca's warning about cravings inflated by false opinion, and slowly, painfully, deliberately, he began rebuilding his internal foundation. He cultivated interests that had nothing to do with anyone's approval. He practiced the pause before reacting to silence or distance from others. He learned to sit alone in a quiet room, without reaching for his phone, to fill the discomfort. Something shifted, not overnight but steadily. He noticed that when he stopped chasing approval at work, his opinions carried more weight, because they were no longer offered as bids for validation but as genuine contributions. He noticed that when he stopped anxiously pursuing romantic attention, the quality of attention he received actually improved, because what he now offered wasn't desperation, it was presence. He didn't become cold. He didn't stop caring. If anything, he cared more genuinely, because his care was no longer entangled with fear. He simply stopped needing his care to be reciprocated in order to feel like a whole person. Eventually, he met someone new, and this time, before their first real conversation about where things stood, he found himself internally repeating a version of those 6 words, "I choose you." I need nothing, not as a performance of confidence, but as settled, lived truth. He wanted this connection deeply, and he was fully at peace, with the possibility that it might not unfold the way he hoped. That peace was the very thing the other person felt most powerfully in his presence. Not a trick, not a technique, just the quiet, magnetic gravity of a person who had finally stopped needing the universe to hand him proof of his own worth. That is the transformation, available to every single person watching this video right now. Let's return to where we began. 6 words: I choose you. I need nothing, not a script to recite on a first date, not a manipulation tactic borrowed from a seduction manual. A complete philosophy of living, distilled into 6 words, built on foundations laid by Epictetus in chains, by Marcus Aurelius on a throne, and by Seneca in the quiet discipline of examining his own cravings. The trap most of us fall into is believing that being chosen requires convincing, chasing, performing, and proving. The Stoic truth is the opposite. Being genuinely chosen by a partner, by an employer, by a friend, by life itself, becomes possible only once you've already chosen yourself, fully, without waiting for anyone's permission to do so. You do not need another person to complete you. You are not half of something, desperately searching for your missing piece. You are whole, capable of choosing deeply and caring fully, while remaining entirely intact, regardless of what any single person decides to do with that choice. That is not coldness. That is the deepest form of freedom the Stoics ever taught, and it is available to you, starting today, in the very next interaction you have. If this video gave you something real to sit with, do 3 things for me. Like this video, so it reaches someone else who desperately needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we release new wisdom like this regularly, built for people who are done being ruled by anxiety and ready to build a life of quiet, unshakable strength. And comment below. Tell me, which of the 6 words hit you hardest? Choose or need? I read every single comment, and I want to hear exactly where you are on this journey. Until next time, choose deeply, need nothing, and walk your path with the calm strength of a Stoic.